If you want to be my lover, you gotta get with my friends. It's Stryker of Enyo. And it's not my line, it's the Spice Girls. They said it first. I don't take credit for it. I know it sounds disgusting. They don't mean it in that way, but whatever. This is Top 10 Most Disappointing Games 2015 that were released for the Xbox One. But first, before we get to the final 5, we are actually going to go to the honorable mentions. These are the games that missed the list either by a month or two or because of other reasons. So, here we go. Honorable mentions of the games that didn't make being mentioned. Murdered Soul Suspect. Not only is it a very tripe title for a game where you are murdered and your soul needs to find the suspect. Yes, it really is that easy, but coming from Square Enix, when you first start the game, it seems to be very polished, it seems to be kind of cool, but the whole notion of the fact that, you're a guy in a hat trying to find a guy that pushed you out the window and shot you with your own gun, it just never really jives with the player as much. It's not as interesting as you would think, and quite honestly, to be a murder mystery, you need to have that. You need to have that mystery. And I mean, it's basically a lot of fetch quests. You're helping out a lot of different people. You're picking up a lot of different clues. They don't always seem to make sense. There's sections where you need to escape from other demons, and they don't really pose a threat to you. And that's the only enemies in the game, so yeah. Lords of the Fallen, another game that missed my cutoff date, released in 2014. Lords of the Fallen has the dubious notion of being called an easy version of Dark Souls. And while that isn't necessarily completely not true, it is also a bit misleading because this game is nowhere near the kind of quality that even the original Dark Souls has. You don't really have that many interesting enemies. I mean, quite honestly, through the whole campaign, you're mostly fighting guys in armor. The bosses are just guys in armor. There might be a few surprises, but I mean, yeah, Dark Souls is known for having a bevy of different creatures and weird things that make you just say, what the fuck is that, and how do I kill it? I never really cared for the art style either, the massive pauldrons, the layered armor. It doesn't seem as realistic, and it seems something more fitting for a Warhammer game, but yeah, it just doesn't fit. Dark Souls had big weapons and armor, but they didn't seem this silly. It's definitely not Japanese inspired. Dark Dicks Don't Die, and you know what? That's not the name of the game, but you're not gonna care what the hell D4 is. Just remember, it's not a sequel to D3 on the Dreamcast. This is actually a relatively high-profile game from director Swery, the same guy that did Deadly Premonition, a sleeper hit on the Xbox 360. It also got a director's cut on the PlayStation 3. Gamers were kind of interested in seeing what this guy was going to make, and it definitely has that kind of style, but it was also designed to be a Kinect-only game at first. Now, before they released it, they came to their senses and made it that you could use a controller, but it is basically a narrative-driven game, and you have long sections of QuickTime events, so yeah, enjoy those. At least you don't have to use the Kinect. And the biggest disappointment, and probably most honorable of being mentioned in honorable mentions, is Halo Master Chief Collection, at least when it comes to disappointing games. The game only missed my cutoff date by a few months, but I just couldn't quite include it. It was part of 2014. You have to give credit to the developers. They did try to make a multiplayer first-person game that used the game engine of 4 separate first-person shooters and did matchmaking through it all and switched between game engines. Not quite a success, and unfortunately they didn't quite get it together before the game launched. But hey, here is your top 5 that you've been waiting for. So here we go. Number 5. Yeah, that's right. It's Star Wars Battlefront. You probably all expected this to be maybe a bit higher up, but quite honestly, there's nothing wrong with the basic mechanics or the visuals. The visuals look absolutely stunning in some regards, even on PC. And the mechanics, I mean, the shooting itself and whatnot, the moving around, there's really nothing bad in that area either. What the main thing is that we all thought that Star Wars Battlefront was going to be closer akin to something like a Battlefield game, and instead we got something that's actually a lot closer to something like Call of Duty, where there is no distinct classes or anything like in the previous Battlefront games. So now you didn't have, engineers or guys that had rocket launchers for their primaries and maybe a different secondary. You didn't have snipers. You didn't have, like I said, character classes from before. And the game also launched with, I think it was only maybe a dozen guns. A dozen different types of blasters. Otherwise, everything else is handled with star cards. So, the sniper rifles, the rocket launchers and whatnot, all of these were handled with cards that had cooldowns and grenades that had cooldowns, and people really just didn't jive with it. Appearances, well, they were nice, but it's just the head. All you can change is the head of your character. The modes themselves, like Walker Assault, had some issues in balancing. EA's tried to rectify some of those problems with a number of different updates. I mean, tweaking, down to the second and half seconds of some of the cooldowns of guns, some of the rate of fires and overheating. So they've really tried to make it wherever players have been complaining about stuff in the game, to the best of their ability. And some stuff has helped, some stuff's been alleviated, but it was the $50 season pass with absolutely no content even hinted at. That kind of rubbed people the wrong way. And I mean, this is a planned 10-year franchise. We are gonna get more Star Wars Battlefront, and in a way that's great, but in a way this feels like they spent a real long time just getting the visuals and whatnot and the play mechanics up, and then they just kind of threw everything in as kind of a side note. We don't know how to handle players carrying rocket launchers. We don't know how to handle them carrying a sniper rifle, so we're just going to make it a star card, a power-up, but we can't just say you only get so many grenade pickups and then figure out where you're going to get those grenade pickups. So there's a cooldown. So in a way it's kind of lazy. In a way maybe it's just the nature of the beast, the fact they had to turn around a game in a relatively small amount of months and get this thing out in time for new movies and whatnot. But hey, it's still kind of disappointing. And even though we didn't expect a whole lot, we kind of expected a little more depth than this. So, yeah. Number 4. Game of Thrones. And this is not the Xbox 360 version of Game of Thrones, back from 2003. I think it was 2003. This is actually the newer one from Telltale Games. So, what's the problem with it? Well, they went with an art style that has this kind of, color palette, kind of a painting. And, it just seems like they went with an art style where, we're going to have blurry textures and we can get away with it. I really don't like the whole painting aspect. You kind of expect it to be, crisp and realistic and gritty and dark, kind of like the show, and here you got kind of an oil canvas painting type style going on, where a lot of the edges are blurry, and there's other little problems. It's kind of suffers from the whole Telltale syndrome in itself. Now, not to be confused with the way that Tales of the Borderlands showed up, because that actually had some decent action set pieces later on. Tales of the Borderland has excellent frickin' writing. Game of Thrones, not so much. In fact,
One of the things some people have complained about is the fact that characters talk about stuff more than they end up doing stuff. That's to be fair, but quite honestly, the problem I have is that you really don't get that much choice. I suppose you could write a thesis on games and choice and the perceived notion of choice, but I repeatedly, with one character, would try to, assert my dominance, and it didn't matter because the game was designed to constantly have other players in a position over mine. So no matter how many times I tried to assert myself and say, hey, you can't do this, the game just beat me down into the hole and the peg that it had designed for me. And I had really no way of getting out of that. The game was designed to do it a certain way, and that's what it is. Action set pieces don't really look that great. There really is no motion capture. Everything is kind of keyframed. The animation really isn't on par. Yeah, I know, it paused there for a moment. So yeah, it was kind of disappointing. And you know what? Walking Dead is better. Sorry I had to say. Number 3. Oh, dear God. Fable 3. If there ever was a franchise that started on original Xbox and just never really hit its potential, it's going to be the Fable series, especially when you're talking about ones that continued on to the 360. It's a shame because we're talking a few months into the year of 2016 and Lionhead Studios is no more. And part of that is probably Fable 3. And the whole Peter Molyneux syndrome, where basically he would talk about how his next Fable game is going to be the greatest RPG ever. And quite honestly, his games would usually score around an 80 or an 85. He never quite would hit a 90 score when it came to the Fable games. Sure, some outlets would give him a 90, but I mean, as far as overall scores, they never would go that high. Not like on par with The Legend of Zelda or whatnot. And ultimately, when Kingdoms of Amalur came out, they showed that combat could actually be quite intricate. And, Jesus, I kind of forgot my character looked like this. Was there a cross-dressing achievement or something? Dear God. I think I'm just trying to make my friends laugh at this point. I realize my dog's a little robot, too. But yeah, so Peter, and he would always basically say his previous Fable game was rubbish and that, the next one was going to, be the best RPG ever. And I mean, the textures had less detail in them. Every time you hit that start button, you would come to this place. And, I love John Cleese, of course, but like, your map, you had to go into this menu, then click on a button next to that map. And I mean, when you're in the map, it doesn't even show you where you are. It never says you are here. I mean, how can you make an RPG where it doesn't even do that? I mean, the little buildings are a nice touch, but dear God, I mean, the voice acting was okay, but the animations were relatively kind of stiff. You could tell they keyframed a lot of stuff. No motion capture. When you want to change a gun, you have to hit the start button, go into this place, then walk into this room, and then you have to choose your weapon from seeing 4 current weapons displayed at a time. There's like literally 30 to 40 things I could be listing that are wrong with this frickin' game that are so tedious. The menus in Fable 2, yeah, people disliked them, but you know what? They served a purpose. Oh, and I can't even, fart in a crowd or give a thumbs up and have everybody appreciate it. Now I have to go into a one-on-one character interaction and just fart in one face at a time. I miss the stuff that you could do in Fable 2. It's just... it's so disappointing, I really like this game, and for a lot of people, this is still one of their favorite RPGs. It just never really got to live up to, what it was. And sales ultimately just weren't the greatest, and ultimately Peter Molyneux left the company. And now they're closed down. So, hey, it's a shame, but yeah, Fable 3, disappointing. Number 2. Oh my lord, Perfect Dark Zero. Talk about being quite possibly the most disappointing game on the 360 for several years. I mean, what the hell is this? 3D gun models shooting inside of each other? The frickin' hovercraft from like halfway through the game or later on? I mean, what is this? What happened to the whole James Bond kind of vibe they had? Why is Joanna Dark now a pop sensation in a way? I mean, she used to be a regal, actual frickin' woman, and then they dyed her hair some kind of frickin' bubblegum. Look, it's just an M16 with a grenade launcher. Why the hell is it spinning in the background? It doesn't make any frickin' sense. And like, why is she a teeny bopper now? She used to be an actual woman that like knew what she was doing. Imagine if they took James Bond. Yeah, there's a cover mechanic too, in a first-person shooter where you can't even jump. Oh, this game has not aged well. I mean, what happens if they would have took James Bond and like instead of him being like 30-something, maybe 35, being at like the prime of his life, and figuring out how to take out the bad guys. Imagine if they just made him like 21 or 22. And I mean, you'd go insane. It's like, oh, he's way too young to be doing this. He's got no idea what he's doing in his own life, much less being able to be a spy and taking out stuff, and all the mechanics, the shooting. I mean, without a doubt, the team that made GoldenEye and then went on and then, well, some of those people ultimately left, but then they went on and made Perfect Dark, which by all means is absolutely the best shooter on the Nintendo 64. They outdid themselves when it came to GoldenEye. They had the time this time to actually put together multiplayer, and they had different skins, and you could do different costumes, and you had secondary fires on all the weapons, and God, this hacking minigame shit is just too much. It's just so many little things that just did not work. It really was the downfall of Rare. I mean, the cutscenes were abhorred. The resolution on the original 360 version was quite crap. You had screen tearing all the time. Thankfully, now that you're looking at the Xbox One version, a lot of the screen tearing has been gone. The resolution might be a little bit of floaty, but this was a very disappointing game, and it really hurt. Number 1! Oh, yeah, it's this game, Battlefield Hardline. And you might be thinking, well, that game wasn't really so bad. And, there's a lot of little things that, I don't know, it was kind of okay. Some people say that the whole Battlefield names never should have been added to this game. We were really looking forward to this game. It looked like a whole lot of fun. And it kind of is, but man, did it have a very limited amount of customization when it first came out. It had a very limited amount of guns. It was almost laughable how few weapons there were in the game. I can't really remember. Now with all the DLC and whatnot, it's actually kind of respectable. You've got a lot of SMGs that can actually be shared through a lot of other different classes and whatnot, but back then you really couldn't do much of anything. And now you can finally adjust some of the colors and whatnot on your characters, and there's a little bit more customization, a few more things, but man, it's kind of hard to just sit down and actually pinpoint, that it's just the guns. Because, I mean, it's not completely the guns, but ultimately this game just underperformed, and you know what? It's virtually dead on PC. PC gamers have moved on. The only thing that's really keeping this game alive is the console gamers, because we don't have as much choice as PC gamers do. I mean, PC gamers can go play Counter-Strike. They've got decades worth of multiplayer games and mods that they have full access to. And on console, it really is more about the current, what's hot, what just came out. But yeah, I mean, even on consoles, you know what? The servers are basically dead. even the third and fourth DLC when they came out, there was like maybe a handful, literally a handful of servers that had matches going on. And like when the fourth one came out, you couldn't find servers that were even hosting. Well, I mean, they were hosting, but there was nobody in the rooms for the first DLC, the second DLC, and the third. As soon as the new DLC would release, the others just weren't even being played. And even then, right now, they're only really doing, aside from the free DLC they just turned out, which is Robbery, you know, all the other ones were just doing large conquest. You know, if you wanted to play Heist or Squad Heist, there's some other new stuff in there that no one's just really played. The community really has ran away from this game. This is the most disappointing game that launched in 2015. And hopefully it'll be better in the future.